We're going to get into another section here of Mehmet Ali Agcas Grey Wolf Association, namely Mehmet Ali Agcas Association with the Grey Wolves in Germany. Returning again to the Village Voice of December 24th, 1985, the article that we were just reading from, The Agcas Khan by Martin Lee and Kevin Coogan. Continuing with their account, he depicted the Grey Wolves as a group of petty thieves who had no political commitment. Cotley told the court that he had shared a house with Agcas and had given him the gun in Vienna, but he insisted that Agcas had acted alone. Cotley's whitewashing of the Grey Wolves turned ugly when another witness, Yalkin Ozbey, identified Oral Chalik, who was still at large, as the running figure in a photo of the crowd at St. Peter's Square, taken just after the Pope was shot. Ozbey, a former Grey Wolf, was visibly shaken when Cotley threatened him 3 times in open court. A heated argument ensued in Turkish, and Agcas joined the fray. The three witnesses exchanged insults, accusations, and suspicions of being used by foreign intelligence agencies to blame the papal assault on Bulgaria and the Soviet Union. The most dramatic moment came when Cotley alleged that Ozbey had served as a go-between for the West German Secret Service, the BND. I'm going to read that last sentence again. The most dramatic moment came when Cotley alleged that Ozbey had served as a go-between for the West German Secret Service, the BND. Cotley said that he and Chalik were promised a large sum of money by the BND via Ozbey if they signed a statement supporting Agcas' claims of a communist conspiracy. When asked by the judge to confirm or deny the story, Ozbey refused to comment. So one of the key points here is that, and this is going to lead us into the Grey Wolf activity in Germany and Agcas' presence in Germany. One of the key things here concerning Abdullah Cotley and some of the other Grey Wolf associates is that they are charging that the BND, the Galen organization about which we spoke earlier, was basically attempting to manipulate their testimony in precisely the same manner that we were looking at in connection with the Bulgarian thesis. In other words, BND is working in a similar manner here as the CSME, attempting to point specifically away from the Grey Wolf right-wing connections and in the direction of the Bulgarian thesis.
Now, one of the things that we talked about way back at the beginning of these broadcasts, and we've talked about many times on One Step Beyond and our other broadcasts here, is the fact that a sincere fanatic is sometimes the most simple person of all to manipulate. Now, one of the possibilities by this courtroom argument of these 3 Turks, Ozbey, Cotley, and Agcas, screaming and yelling at each other in Turkish. Now, of course, there's always the possibility that the whole thing was contrived for the benefit of listeners. However, the possibility also presents itself that we may be beginning to find an insight into the assassination and the reasons behind the assassination. Now, we've already talked about the bizarre, embarrassing, and potentially fatal, obviously for many, mess that Italian politics and Italian business was in, specifically right-wing politics and right-wing business at about the time of John Paul II, the attempt on his life, because of the revelations, the pending revelations about P2 and the Vatican Bank and other things. Now, as a matter of fact, the Vatican Bank revelations had already been made, most of them. Now, it's quite possible at this point that, as we will see, that an assassination attempt on the Pope was already part of the ideological background of the Grey Wolves organization. But also the Grey Wolves organization was connected by very direct political links to a number of the people who had something to lose if John Paul II either A, garnered closer ties with the Eastern Bloc, or B, pursued the investigation into Vatican finances and other things that his predecessor had planned to. So perhaps what we are seeing here is a case of honest right-wing fanatics who had a Pope shooting on their ideological agenda, having been convinced to do it by certain parties for whom it was not a political thing in the sense of an ideological thing, but it was a very practical thing to do at that point in time. Anyway, but right now we're going to see a little bit about their actual ideological agenda.
It's worth noting again now, as we come into BND connections here, or allegations of BND connections, that Ruzi Nazar was not only a Nazi, but affiliated with the anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations in Wackel. That group is not only very close to U.S. intelligence, but also the Galen organization as well. Witness Radio Free America numbers 14 and 15.
Okay, now we're going to read a little section here from Covert Action Information Bulletin. Again, this is the spring 1985 issue, otherwise known as issue number 23. Now, before the section we're going to be reading, they mentioned that right after he escaped from jail, after killing the editor of Milliyet, Abdi Ipeki, that Mehmet Ali Agca sent a letter to Milliyet threatening to kill Pope John Paul II, who was about to visit Turkey. Now, obviously, that killing did not take place, and in fact no attempt took place, but the idea had been filed. Now, whether it had been filed in the mind of Agca, which he then sent it in a letter to Milliyet, or whether somebody else noticed that and said, hey, we have connections into these gray wolves, maybe we should utilize them, we'll leave that up to you. However, then after his escape from prison, Agca led a very interesting life for a while with a lot of twists and turns, which we're going to follow. At this point, Agca's life as a fugitive began. Wanted by Turkish authorities and Interpol, Agca nevertheless moved with apparent ease through some dozen countries in the 18 months separating his prison escape from his assignation with the Pope in May 1981. Throughout this time, Agca was rarely outside the Grey Wolves network and was frequently in contact with the Malatya gang. After murdering the informer who had tipped off police to his whereabouts, Agca was taken by the Grey Wolves to Iran to hide out. Some months later, he returned to Turkey and, aided by a false passport provided him by Grey Wolves members, he was smuggled into Bulgaria and through that country to Western Europe. We just might mention parenthetically that we've already talked about the fact that SMOM had set up their particular Guns for Drugs network going from Lebanon and the Middle East through Bulgaria into Western Europe. So that was the SMOM route that Mehmet Ali Agca was following into Western Europe. Arriving there in the fall of 1980, Agca narrowly escaped the military coup which took place in Turkey in September, and which forced many Grey Wolves underground or into exile abroad. Thus, the Malatya gang soon followed Agca to Western Europe, where they sought shelter among the Grey Wolves network in the large Turkish immigrant communities of Switzerland and West Germany. In fleeing from Turkey, Agca was not abandoning the Grey Wolves network so much as seeking the shelter of its exterior branches. The Nationalist Action Party and the Grey Wolves had recruited for many years among the millions of Turkish men who left their country to work in Switzerland, West Germany, or other European countries for a year or a few years before returning home. When a 1976 Turkish court decision made it illegal for the Grey Wolves and the NAP to maintain foreign affiliates, they were reorganized into the Federation of Turkish Idealist Associations, secretly maintaining their ties to the National Action Party. The Federation claimed 50,000 members in Europe, and at the time of the military coup in September of 1980, the Federation boasted 129 chapters in Western Europe, including 87 in West Germany. The West German police estimated that at least 26,000 Turkish workers in West Germany were members of neo-fascist organizations. Another report estimated that there were 200 conservative Islamic centers in West Germany, and the New York Times cited, quote, recent documentation by West Germany's Labor Federation, which pointed out strong anti-Western, anti-Semitic, and anti-Christian currents in the Islamic center's publications. This network of right-wing Turkish organizations sheltered Agca between the time he left Turkey and the day he shot the Pope. Musa Serdar Çelebi, the head of the powerful Frankfurt branch of the Federation and a leader of the Federation's activities in Western Europe, has been indicted for aiding Agca and arranging to pay him money. Omer Bashi, a Grey Wolves militant in Switzerland, has been indicted for delivering a gun to Agca in Milan, and the gun was obtained from Horst Grillmeyer, a right-wing gun dealer based in Austria. In short, Agca was a Grey Wolves militant, and up to May 13, 1981, all his contacts, for which there is independent evidence, lead straight to the Grey Wolves. Okay, before we sum up this article, we just want to mention broadcasting from Foothill College. This is KFJC, Los Altos Hills. Okay, now again, apparently in some shape or form, the idea of shooting the Pope had passed through the mind of Mehmet Ali Agca. Now, in normal situations, that would be advanced as evidence of a lone nut assassin. However, as we have seen, Mehmet Ali Agca has at no time in his entire career performed the actions of a lone nut. In fact, probably at the direct behest of the Grey Wolves and elements affiliated to them, he shot the editor of Milliyet. He was allowed to basically walk out of Turkish military prison, After he walked out of the Turkish military prison, with help, obviously, he sent a letter to Milliyet, the newspaper, saying that he was going to shoot the Pope when the Pope showed up in Turkey. Although he didn't do this, he began a long peregrination that led him down the entire SMOM pipeline, and again, SMOM intimately connected to the Western intelligence services as well as to those right-wing factions in Italy who had the most to lose if any of the investigations into the Vatican bank finances and various right-wing political machinations were revealed. So Mehmet Ali Agca moves right down the SMOM pipeline, winds up in Western Germany, all the time in contact with various Grey Wolf neo-fascist network holdings, and winds up in West Germany, at which point another Grey Wolf gets the gun for him from Horst Grillmeyer, a right-wing Austrian gun dealer.
Who was a lot more than just right-wing, as we're going to see in a couple of minutes.
As we're going to see, gives it to Mehmet Ali Agca, who winds up in St. Peter's Square, May 13th of 1981, and shoots Pope John Paul II.
Okay, now remember Horst Grillmeyer, because again, we're coming back to him in just a second. It's worth noting that there are indications that the elements of the National Action Party and the Grey Wolves in particular are sanctioned by elements of the German authorities, specifically in order to sort of act as strong-arm personnel to keep some of the so-called Turkish Gastarbeiter, the Turkish guest workers, in line. Reading now from Middle East Magazine's issue of July of 1981, and this article is called The Octopus. It's about the P2 Lodge, and it's authored by Middle East correspondent Paulo Caligaris, Caligaris, and research credit for this article belongs to Ted Rubenstein, who again has been so instrumental in getting all this information and getting so much of this information to us. Now, reading from The Octopus, Middle East, July of 1981. Agca's extreme right-wing backers, Alparslan Türkeş's National Action Party, had close links with similar groups in Italy, Spain, West Germany, and other European countries. Seminars and conferences involving Turkish, Italian, NAR and Terza Posizione West German, the Hoffmann Group, Spanish, Gruppo, French, and Belgian neo-fascist groups have taken place in recent years in Belgium, France, Spain, and Italy. But these meetings never received the attention from the authorities which left-wing gatherings usually provoke. Opponents of the Turkish military regime have often charged West German police with tolerating the presence of NAP Grey Wolves as a useful weapon to use against the 1.5 million Turkish workers in their trade unions. The last words of recently killed Nekaki Uyguz, Uyguz, a shopkeeper in West Berlin who had abandoned the Grey Wolves, were Ali Agca. So apparently, Ali Agca may have been very active after escaping Turkey and heading for West Germany, but before shooting the Pope. Anyway, keep in mind the charges on the part of certain Turkish activists that in West Germany the authorities sanctioned the Grey Wolves in order to keep Turkish guest worker trade unions in line.
Okay, we're going to read a very short segment here from Eagle magazine of June 1982.
By the way, Eagle is a mercenary trade publication similar in scope and function to Soldier of Fortune.
Similar in scope and fortune to Soldier of Function magazine. You get the general idea. The article is entitled Who Shot the Pope? It was written by John D.E.E. And this is just a short segment. Again, talking about the founder of the National Action Party, Alparslan Türkeş. He says, Türkeş could also count among his post-World War II intimates at least one former leading official of the West German BND, the German equivalent of the CIA, Dr. Hans Eckhart Kanapin. Kanapin is spelled K-A-N-N-A-P-I-N. Kanapin, up until his recent death, ran a Turkish Studies Institute in Munich, largely through the funding of the Türkeş and the Grey Wolves. So, Hans Kanapin, a leading official of the BND, again, remember the BND, the West German Secret Police, or the West German Secret Services, formerly NATO Secret Service, before that, CIA's Eastern Front Intelligence, and before that, Reinhard Gehlen's secret network on the Eastern Front for Adolf Hitler. Hans Kanapin of the BND also connected to Alparslan Türkeş and running a Turkish Studies Institute in Munich. Again, Munich crops up, largely through the funding of Türkeş and the Grey Wolves. Remember, Munich also the location for Ruzi Nazar's chapter of the anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations, and for the place where Ruzi Nazar first met up with Paul Henze through the auspices of Radio Free Europe, which at that time was radio for the whatever it was.
Liberation of Russia from communism.
There you go.
Now, remember the aforementioned Horst Grillmeyer, the weapons dealer from whom the gun that Mehmet Ali Agca used to shoot the Pope. He was described as a right-winger. We're going to take a look at some information now which will indicate that he was a whole lot more than just right-wing. An article concerning Grillmeyer appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle of Saturday, January 15th, 1983. It's a New York Times story, dateline Vienna, and headlined, Austrian gun dealer arrested, linked to Pope's shooting. An arms dealer whose name has been mentioned in connection with the pistol used in the attempt on the life of Pope John Paul II was arrested yesterday in a probe into the smuggling of weapons from Czechoslovakia. The dealer is Horst Grillmeyer, Grillmayer. An Interior Ministry official said yesterday that Austria is investigating reports from Italy that an Austrian license issued in Grillmeyer's name was used to buy in Switzerland and sell in Austria the pistol Mehmet Ali Agca used to shoot the Pope on May 13, 1981. In addition, State Prosecutor Otto Schimon said he was preparing a case against Otto Tintner, another arms dealer. He said he would charge Tintner with violations of the arms law and financial irregularities in connection with the buying and selling of a consignment of weapons that included the pistol used by Agca. Schimon said that the pistol was sold to an unknown person and that because his case did not concern the attempted assassination in St. Peter's Square, he had not inquired into the identity of the buyer and the circuit by which the weapon reached the Turkish gunman. A Turk, Omar Baji, has been extradited from Switzerland to Italy and may be charged with providing the pistol to Agca. The case in which Grillmeyer was arrested Tuesday night is causing considerable attention because of the suspicion of official Czechoslovak involvement in arms smuggling. A Czechoslovak citizen, Peter Bardon, was arrested at the border crossing point at Kleinhaugsdorf because the Austrian rented car he was driving contained, in addition to a declared lot of 15,000 rounds of ammunition, 300 undeclared pistols and 7 semi-automatic rifles of a Soviet design so new that military experts said the type was unknown in the West, according to an Austrian customs official. These rifles, identified as Draganov, were equipped with special night sights and are presumably meant for snipers, officials said. The 3 factory cases in which they were contained were reported to have been addressed to Grillmeyer. The pistols were said to have been consigned to another weapons dealer, Leopold Willert, W-I-L-L-E-R-T, the third person under arrest. The suspicion of an official Czechoslovak link to the smuggling arises from 2 factors. The first is the exceptional status enjoyed by Bardon. Czechoslovakia puts severe limits on the free movement of its citizens and has usually required Czechoslovaks whom it allows to live abroad to give up their citizenship and never return even for visits. But Bardon, who holds no official Czechoslovak job, has been allowed to take an Austrian residence permit and frequently visit Czechoslovakia for unknown reasons. The second reason is the official incredulity that in a tightly controlled country, Bardon could acquire, apparently in the Prague area, such quantities of weapons and transport them through the country and across the border. Czechoslovak customs inspection, even of ordinary tourists, tends to be meticulous. Cars are usually searched with painstaking care and great loss of time. Austrian customs official, usually casual, were said to have become suspicious when they observed the ease with which a car carrying a cleared cargo of ammunition was passed by the Czechoslovak border officials. So, summing up that article that we just looked at, the gun which Mehmet Ali Agca used to shoot the Pope was brought into Austria by an arms dealer named Horst Grillmeyer in conjunction with a bunch of Soviet-manufactured sniper rifles containing scopes. Now, apparently, the individual here who's bringing the weapons in from Czechoslovakia is the same person who's bringing the gun for Mehmet Ali Agca. Now, the clear implication of the article just read here. Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to mention, I think that we want to keep these separate. Now, this is a recent thing with the Czechoslovakian weapons, and that he brought because this is 83, and this had just happened, I believe, and that Grillmeyer was responsible for bringing in the pistol for Mehmet Ali Agca, but this is something he had just been arrested for just before this article was published.
Oh, okay, but I basically misspoke myself. Okay, the point being here that the Austrian arms dealer who brings in the Pope's pistol, the Agca's pistol used to shoot the Pope, is also involved here in a Czechoslovakian arms smuggling case. Now, the clear implication here is that he's working for the Soviet bloc authorities. The obvious implication has been here that this was done with Soviet complicity, and we're going to learn a little bit more about it. Now, remember, this is Horst Grillmeyer, the fellow who brings in the Pope's shooting. I was confusing the Pope's pistol. I was confusing the two cases here. Later on, he's involved in arms smuggling from the East. The point being here that the tone given this article clearly implies that the man who was bringing in the pistol was working for the East Bloc. That's the East Bloc overtones here in connection with the Pope shooting is the clear implication of the article.
And this is going to provide a fascinating insight not only to the Mehmet Ali Agca case itself, but as we'll see in a moment, it's going to make some suggestions about some other things, and we'll discuss those in a moment. This next article is out of the Times of February 8th, 1983. And the headline is Plot Grows in Secret Gun Affair. Again, they're referring to the same case that we just read about. The dealer who brought in, back in 1981, the gun for Mehmet Ali Agca had been arrested 2 years later for bringing in Soviet-made weapons through Czechoslovakia. This article is written by David Blow from the Vienna Bureau. The 7 Soviet-made Dragunov sniper rifles found being smuggled into Austria from Czechoslovakia last month were not on their way to some terrorist organization as it was originally suspected. Well, we'll find out about that. It turns out they had been ordered by the West German intelligence service, the Bundesnachrichtendienst. This is clear from Austrian investigations into the affair, which have revealed that the Austrian arms dealer, Herr Horst Grillmeyer, was asked to obtain the rifles by a certain Herr Paul Saalbach, S-A-A-L-B-A-C-H, who claimed to be acting on behalf of a Munich-based arms collectors association. Now it has been discovered that the association is simply a cover for the West German intelligence service. Last week, Herr Erwin Lank, the Austrian Interior Minister, expressed annoyance at the time it was taking for the West German authorities to check up on the association. The explanation makes the whole affair, if anything, even more mysterious and leaves 2 main questions unanswered. Why did West German intelligence want the weapons in the first place? Why was the original plan, to fly the weapons directly to Munich, abandoned in favor of a clumsy attempt to smuggle them through Austria? Okay, now a bunch of things to look at here. First of all, as Dave mentioned, this is Horst Grillmeyer, the man who provided the gun that Mehmet Ali Agca used. It was brought to Mehmet Ali Agca by another Grey Wolf, Turkish Grey Wolf, one who later on would meet with Stefano Della Chiai. This was the same gun that Mehmet Ali Agca used in his attempted assassination on the Pope. Brought to him by brought into Austria by right-wing guns dealer Herr Horst Grillmeyer. Now, Grillmeyer is also then later involved in this affair of the Dragunov rifles, these super secret, super new, night-sighted sniper rifles being brought into Austria from Czechoslovakia. Now, interestingly enough, in a way that parallels some of the other things that's happening, even though it's quite possible that in practice this case is completely separated from the other cases, one of the things that has been used all the time as an excuse for the Bulgarian thesis is the ease with which some of these people moved in and out of Bulgaria. Some of the Turks, some of the other, as we have seen, SMOM-related gun and drug smugglers with their contacts to Western intelligence. Now, as Dave mentioned last week, it's quite possible that the SMOM network was left open by both sides as a conduit to move their intelligence agents in and out. I think that this is pure speculation, but it's quite possible that the Peter Bardon mentioned in the previous article is a man who moves in and out of Czechoslovakia seemingly at will and was involved in this attempt to smuggle in these Dragunov rifles into Austria, very possibly a part of the SMOM network, although the SMOM network by this time is pretty much blown up. Now, of course, what turns out, though, is that it is not in fact, any kind of Soviet terrorism, just as we have seen in practice that the Bulgarian thesis will be falling apart. Neither in this case is this either Soviet-sponsored terrorism, but is in fact the West German CIA, the BND, based in Munich in this case, as so many of these other things in this case have been, who have contacted Herr Grillmeyer and have gotten him to get this Czechoslovakian guy to bring in these super-secret sniper rifles. Now, not one sniper rifle to have a look at in the way that occasionally the West would like to get their hands on one of the Soviet jets or something to take it apart, but 7 sniper rifles. Now, one of the things we mentioned also in one of the earlier broadcasts is the fact that one of the reasons apparently that a lot of these weapons were coming out of Eastern Europe were so that they could be taken out different places and planted on sites. And just as Claire Sterling maintains in her terror network that all the world's terrorism can be laid at the feet of the KGB, well, as we've mentioned, the strategy of tension, you set off a bomb, you blow up a bunch of civilians, you blame it on the left. Similarly, you assassinate world leaders, like a pope or somebody else, and you pin the blame on the Soviets, or, as we've seen down in Honduras, it has been alleged that the Sandinistas come rampaging over the border, and they blow up a bunch of Hondurans while they're fighting the Contras, and then they disappear back into the jungles, and later all you find are bodies and military fatigues with Soviet-made weapons. Those are Sandinistas, we are told.
Now remember, the obvious implication in the story that we read from the Chronicle, it was actually a New York Times story, was meant to confuse the alleged Soviet bloc connections of Horst Grillmeyer with the Pope shooting plot. Although there were two different cases, I fused a synapse there for a second, forgot that these took place at two separate times, but there was an obvious implication there, an obvious attempt to associate Horst Grillmeyer and his bringing in of the pistol used to shoot the Pope with the East Bloc. Now, as it turns out, Horst Grillmeyer has been used basically as a front for all intents and purposes by the BND, by the Gehlen organization. Now, this recalls something that we looked at in our third program. Basically, we took a look at a German firm called Merex, an arms trafficking firm, an arms firm called Merex, which was used by the BND, by the same Gehlen organization, to channel arms to Italian fascists. Now, specifically, the man that was used by the BND Merex Association was a man named Guido Giannattini, who was not only the head of the SID, one of the Italian intelligence services at the time, but was a key member of P2, head of Terza Posizione, and a key associate of Stefano della Chiaia in the Piazza Fontana massacre and in the execution of the strategy of tension that we looked at in our third program. Also, later in that very same third program, we took a look at Klaus Barbie and Friedrich Schwend, two of the Nazi affiliates of this whole P2 nexus, and their work with Merex in their arms trafficking ventures in Central America. So BND use of arms smugglers as fronts, basically, arms traffickers as fronts, is something we've looked at in the past. And remember the Grillmeyer connection to the Pope shooting and our work concerning Merex and its use as a BND front for channeling arms to Italian fascists.
Now, also remember, we have just talked about Hans Eckert Kanapin of the BND, based in Munich, with connections to these self-same people, especially Ruzi Nazar and the others, who himself was involved with the Grey Wolves, the same Grey Wolf organizations in West Germany that sheltered Mehmet Ali Agca before he shot the Pope. Kanapin and the BND connected to these organizations. We also talked about the fact that that there are allegations that the BND allows and even manipulates these Grey Wolf organizations to keep the Turkish workers in order. In other words, uses them as stormtroopers to keep the Turkish workers and trade unionists in order. And we talked at some length about the fact that Munich was the original connection point between Paul Henze, the first promulgator of the KGB shot the Pope theory, and Ruzi Nazar, the CIA's man in the Grey Wolves. And we topped this all off at the beginning of the broadcast by talking about how Frank Turpel, whose boss Theodore Shackley was in Rome 3 months before the assassination attempt on the Pope, to talk to General Giuseppe Santavito, big man in the P2, head of Super Sesame, Italian intelligence, how Frank Turpel also says that he trained the Grey Wolves and Mehmet Ali Agca in the use of the same gun that apparently, it seems, was acquired for him by the Grey Wolves and quite possibly the West German BND. Folks, we are traveling a long way from Bulgaria, except geographically, and we are traveling a long way into the territory of Western intelligence.
Okay, so basically, I recall also with regard to Frank Turpel that Theodore Shackley, the man who ran Turpel for CIA, is working with Santavito of P2 and Sesame 3 months before the Pope is shot. After both of their official retirements from CIA, both Shackley and Frank Turpel go to work for Edwin Wilson's series of corporate fronts. And recall also not only the BND links, by way of tying things up with last week, not only the BND links to Steve Baum, but also Eugene Bartholomeus and his links with Edwin Wilson and the Nugenhan Bank and so forth. And recall also, because later on we're going to come to the Red Brigades, that Edwin Wilson was reported training the Red Brigades, among others. So a lot to remember. We'll be coming back to these later in the broadcast.
But first, we're going to take a break for just a few minutes and give those of you who are actually bearing with us all the way through a chance to get up and stretch and... And we're back. And that was Sparks with Propaganda and Robin Hitchcock with the Sleeping Knights of Jesus. And while we're talking about the Sleeping Knights of Jesus, we're going to talk a little bit for a while about the Knights of Malta. And what we're going to be doing is playing 2 Hard Rain tapes for you from February of '83, featuring Dave Emery. These tapes originally were aired as part of his, what was then a massive attempt to bring in all the elements together of the assassination attempt on the Pope, which at the time defeated even Dave's noble efforts, and now we're trying it again, folks. So we're going to bring these 2 segments in on the Knights of Malta, and the purpose and where they fit into all this will be revealed anon. So right now, 2 segments originally aired on Hard Rain in February of 1983, having to do with the Knights of Malta and the Mediterranean merry-go-round.
The host for the next half hour or so, and today on Hard Rain we're going to be continuing with the massive and ongoing series analyzing the events in and around the shooting of the Pope, the Vatican banking scandals, and the many other events overtaking the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church these days. The last broadcast we dealt with an organization called the Opus Dei, which is a far right-wing organization currently gaining influence within the Vatican. Subject of today's broadcast is, and the next several broadcasts as well, is going to be another right-wing organization, very powerful, that functions within the Catholic Church. This organization is called popularly called, I should say, the Knights of Malta. The formal name for this organization is the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, and hitherto we're going to be referring to that by its abbreviation SMOM. Okay, so SMOM is the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, popularly known as the Knights of Malta. All of the information we're going to be presenting on the broadcast today comes from an article called The Men Behind the New Counter-Reformation. That article was authored by Kevin Coogan, his last name Coogan. The article was published in a newsletter handed out to investigative reporters called Parapolitics. Parapolitics is edited by Jonathan Marshall. Marshall's the former editor of Inquiry magazine, and he currently is writing editorials for the San Jose Mercury News here in the South Bay. And once again, this article called The Men Behind the New Counter-Reformation by Kevin Coogan in Parapolitics issue number 6. We're going to begin the broadcast today by taking a look at the thoughts concerning the connection between the Protestant Reformation and communism, those thoughts coming from a man named Professor Luigi Getta of Catholic Action. We're then going to take a look at what Coogan feels is the worldwide rise of right-wing Catholic power. Following that, we're going to take a look at the Sovereign Military Order of Malta itself. The SMOM is the military wing of the church. It was formed during the Crusades. Following that, we're going to take a look at some of the key American members of the SMOM. American SMOM members include present CIA Director William Casey, former CIA Director John McCone, both William and James Buckley, and a number of other people. And as I say, we're going to be talking about that and during the course of this broadcast. That is to say, some of the key members of the American government and business community who are members of the Knights of Malta. Following that, we're going to take a look at some fascinating information concerning just what the Knights of Malta involves. Basically, any member of the Knights of Malta is considered by more than 40 different countries to be a member of a separate state. Okay, the Knights of Malta are believed to be a separate state are considered by more than 40 different countries. We're going to take a look at the influence within the Reagan administration of a number of right-wing Catholic figures, including former National Security Advisor Richard Allen, present National Security Advisor William Clark, and General Vernon Walters, former Deputy Director of the CIA, and currently one of the linchpins of the Reagan administration's Central American policy. After that, we're going to take a look at the recent inclusion in the Knights of Malta of former Secretary of State Alexander Haig. We're also going to take a look at Coogan's observations on possible anti-Soviet brinksmanship by members of this organization. Next, we're going to take a look at the inclusion or the induction into the Knights of Malta and the granting of a very high Knights of Malta award to none other than Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's chief of intelligence for the Eastern Front, who served the same function for both the CIA and NATO and went on to become chief of all German intelligence for the Federal Republic following the war. We're also going to take a look at the influence of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta upon the anti-communist witch hunts of Senator Joe McCarthy, and some interesting information about that. We're also going to take a look at the presence in the Knights of Malta of a man named Tom Bowen, a law partner of Roy Cohn, intimate of McCarthy's, and also a mafia lawyer, also identified by the Torbett document as a key individual involved in the funding of Permindex, identified by the Torbett document as one of the central organizations involved in the assassination of John Kennedy. We're also going to take a look at the role played by Mr. Boland's law firm in New York City politics. The law firm of Sachs, Bacon, and Boland basically represents the Archdiocese of New York and its right-wing cardinal, Cardinal Cook. The last piece of information we're going to look at on the broadcast concerns basically the role of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta's Cardinal Spellman, one of the sort of spiritual guiding lights of that organization during the mid-20th century in this country. We're going to take a look at Spellman's role in American politics, specifically his role in the Vietnam War, his role in getting Diem appointed president, and we're going to take a look at some of the profound policy differences between President John Kennedy and his brothers and the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. Well, we're going to begin, as I say, by taking a look at a quote here from Professor Luigi Jeddah, the key figure in an organization called Catholic Action, and, well, just what his significance is for us, we're going to be talking about in a minute. Once again, all of the information on this broadcast comes from an article from Parapolitics newsletter edited by Jonathan Marshall. The author of this article was Kevin Coogan. Its title is The Men Behind the New Counter-Reformation. Coogan begins his article with some observations by Professor Luigi Jeddah of Catholic Action, and Jeddah's thoughts here concern what he feels is the direct connection between the Protestant Reformation and the formation of communism. Professor Jeddah writes as follows. 4 centuries ago began that laceration of Europe from which we suffer to this day, and it was the Reformation that worked it. Look at what has taken place as the years unfolded. Protestantism means religious liberalism. It did not take this religious liberalism long to become political liberalism, the liberalism of the French Revolution, which did not express the Christian concept of liberty, but that of a self-styled liberty, a liberty of doing everything and anything that is actually license. After reaching power, liberalism kept saying, laissez-faire, laissez-passer. Then, you see, the social question became more and more sharp, and the early romantic socialism of the last century was born as an instrument for common defense. But this romantic socialism has matured. It has become the advocacy of the dictatorship of a class. It has become a political system, communism. As you see, there is a fatal logic to error. You see how tightly interwoven are the transformations in thought and the transformations in social conditions. Over the centuries, today's communism has descended from the Protestant Revolution. I would add there that Professor Jeddah's statement that there is a fatal logic to error contains a considerable amount of probably unintentional irony. At any rate, keep in mind Professor Jeddah's thoughts here, because although this might seem a little amusing to you, and the thought of an organization like the Knights of Malta wielding a great deal of influence within our government may seem sort of bizarre, his thoughts are not as irrelevant as they might appear at first, and the Knights of Malta, as arcane an organization as it might appear, is certainly not the subject for laughter. Those of you who find yourself so inclined may want to put your laughter and amusement on hold till you hear something about the organization and some of the people involved in it. There's been a lot of publicity in recent months concerning the so-called liberation theology, that is to say, the role played in liberal or progressive politics by elements of the Catholic Church, particularly in Latin America. Kevin Coogan, in his article here, The Men Behind the New Counter-Reformation, takes note of that and notes that something which has gained far less publicity is the fact that alongside of this liberalizing influence within the Church has been an opposite motion, a motion to swing the Church to the right, and that this has been at least this right-wing or fascistic drift within the Catholic Church has been at least as evident and at least as important and far less publicized than the liberalizing trend and elements. Coogan goes on to describe this and then basically locates the center for this right-wing swing within the Catholic Church as the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. Now, Coogan goes on to describe the Knights of Malta and point out essentially that the Knights of Malta was the military wing of the Catholic Church, a Vatican order set up during the Crusades and dating back roughly 1,000 years. Coogan writes as follows. To understand the rise of right-wing Catholic power worldwide, it is necessary to clearly identify the heart of the beast. That is an organization called the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, or SMOM, a Vatican order which has been in existence for almost 1,000 years. Better known as the Knights of Malta, this organization began as the military arm of Catholic power at the time of the Crusades. Ever since that time, the Knights of Malta have been in the leadership of the right-wing Catholic aristocracy of Europe in the crusade against secularism, Protestantism, communism, or any other form of social organization which threatens the power of the Catholic nobility. It is no accident, then, that Professor Luigi Gedda, longtime head of Catholic Action, became a member of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta in 1948. Professor Gedda is the gentleman whose thoughts concerning communism and its relationship to the Reformation we read you just a second ago. We're going to talk up some more about him in just a minute.
It's already part of the ideological background of the Grey Wolves organization. But also the Grey Wolves organization was connected by very direct political links to a number of the people who had something to lose if John Paul II either A, garnered closer ties with the Eastern Bloc, or B, pursued the investigation into Vatican finances and other things that his predecessor had planned to. So perhaps what we are seeing here is a case of honest right-wing fanatics who had a Pope shooting on their ideological agenda, having been convinced to do it by certain parties for whom it was not a political thing in the sense of an ideological thing, but it was a very practical thing to do at that point in time. Anyway, but right now we're going to see a little bit about their actual ideological agenda.
It's worth noting again now, as we come into BND connections here, or allegations of BND connections, that Ruzi Nazar was not only a Nazi, but affiliated with the anti-Bolshevik bloc of nations in Wackel. That group is not only very close to U.S. intelligence, but also the Galen organization as well. Witness Radio Free America numbers 14 and 15.
Okay, now we're going to read a little section here from Covert Action Information Bulletin. Again, this is the spring 1985 issue, otherwise known as issue number 23. Now, before the section we're going to be reading, they mentioned that right after he escaped from jail, after killing the editor of Milliyet, Abdi Ipeki, that Mehmet Ali Agcas sent a letter to Milliyet threatening to kill Pope John Paul II, who was about to visit Turkey. Now, obviously, that killing did not take place, and in fact, no attempt took place. But the idea had been filed. Now, whether it had been filed in the mind of Agcas, which he then sent it in a letter to Milliyet, or whether somebody else noticed that and said, hey, we have connections into these Grey Wolves, maybe we should utilize them, we'll leave that up to you. However, then after his escape from prison, Agcas led a very interesting life for a while with a lot of twists and turns, which we're going to follow. At this point, Agcas' life as a fugitive began. Wanted by Turkish authorities and Interpol, Agcas nevertheless moved with apparent ease through some dozen countries in the 18 months separating his prison escape from his assignation with the Pope in May 19...
We're going to get into another section here of Mehmet Ali Agcas' Grey Wolf Association, namely Mehmet Ali Agcas' association with the Grey Wolves in Germany. Returning again to the Village Voice of December 24th, 1985, the article that we were just reading from, The Agca Khan by Martin Lee and Kevin Coogan. Continuing with their account,
he depicted the Grey Wolves as a group of petty thieves who had no political commitment. Cotley told the court that he had shared a house with Agcas and had given him the gun in Vienna, but he insisted that Agcas had acted alone. Cotley's whitewashing of the Grey Wolves turned ugly when another witness, Yalkin Ozbey, identified Oral Chalik, who was still at large, as the running figure in a photo of the crowd at St. Peter's Square, taken just after the Pope was shot. Ozbey, a former Grey Wolf, was visibly shaken when Cotley threatened him 3 times in open court. A heated argument ensued in Turkish, and Agcas joined the fray. The three witnesses exchanged insults, accusations, and suspicions of being used by foreign intelligence agencies to blame the papal assault on Bulgaria and the Soviet Union.
The things that we talked about way back at the beginning of these broadcasts, and we've talked about many times on One Step Beyond and our other broadcasts here, is the fact that a sincere fanatic is sometimes the most simple person of all to manipulate. Now, one of the possibilities by this courtroom argument of these three Turks, Ozbey, Katli, and Agcas, screaming and yelling at each other in Turkish. Now, of course, there's always the possibility that the whole thing was contrived for the benefit of listeners. However, the possibility also presents itself that we may be beginning to find an insight into the assassination and the reasons behind the assassination. Now, we've already talked about the bizarre, embarrassing, and potentially fatal, obviously for many, mess that Italian politics and Italian business was in, specifically right-wing politics and right-wing business at about the time of John Paul II, the attempt on his life, because of the revelations, the pending revelations about P2 and the Vatican Bank and other things. Now, as a matter of fact, the Vatican Bank revelations had already been made, most of them. Now, it's quite possible at this point that, as we will see, that an assassination attempt on the Pope was...
The most dramatic moment came when Katli alleged that Ozbey had served as a go-between for the West German Secret Service, the BND. I'm going to read that last sentence again. The most dramatic moment came when Katli alleged that Ozbey had served as a go-between for the West German Secret Service, the BND. Katli said that he and Chalik were promised a large sum of money by the BND via Ozbey if they signed a statement supporting Agcas' claims of a communist conspiracy. When asked by the judge to confirm or deny the story, Ozbey refused to comment. So one of the key points here is that, and this is going to lead us into the Grey Wolf activity in Germany and Agcas' presence in Germany. One of the key things here concerning Abdullah Katli and some of the other Grey Wolf associates is that they are charging that the BND, the Galen organization about which we spoke earlier, was basically attempting to manipulate their testimony in precisely the same manner that we were looking at in connection with the Bulgarian thesis. In other words, BND is working in a similar manner here as the CISMI, attempting to point specifically away from the Grey Wolf right-wing connections and in the direction of the Bulgarian thesis.
Now, one of the